On August 15, 2010, a 49-year-old Diane Kyne lay dead on her bed in her bedroom. Her son, Kevin, panicked and called the emergency service, shouting to the operator that his stepfather had killed his mother. A few minutes later, another call came in to 911 from the same location. This time it was Bill Kyne, Diane's husband. With difficulty catching his breath, Bill told the operator that his stepson had strangled his wife. There were only 3 people in the house, and one of them was dead. Only 2 know the truth. What happened to Diane Kyne that day? Was she killed by the man she considered the love of her life? Or was her life taken by her own flesh and blood? The calls were all the more unusual because they were made in the midst of a heated argument. One person called and told the truth, while the second had already figured out which story would allow them to come out unscathed. It's unfathomable how cunning the mind of this killer must be. The city of Seminole is located in Pinellas County, Florida. It's where Bill Kyne lived with his wife, Diane, and her 23-year-old son, Kevin. Bill describes Diane as the woman of his dreams. They met in the early 2000s when Bill noticed a very beautiful woman outside a nail salon that she managed along with her twin sister. They exchanged a few words, and Diane continued with her business, but the beautiful woman stayed on Bill's mind. He had to find a way to get to know her. Bill persuaded his daughter to get a manicure at the salon. With his daughter's support to visit the salon, he gathered the courage to ask Diane out on a date. It was a passionate romance, and less than 2 years later they were married. Bill's 5 children were happy that their father had found new love. Diane's son, Kevin, also initially formed a strong bond with Bill. After 4 years of living with his stepfather, he decided to take his family name. The family seemed very happy. However, not everything in the family went smoothly. Kevin had always been the center of his mother's attention, and now he had to move into a home with 5 other children and share their collective memories, which made him feel like an outsider. Kevin's cousin remembers that it wasn't easy for him because the other children didn't accept him and didn't treat him well. However, by 2010, all 5 of Bill's children had grown up and started their own lives. Only 23-year-old Kevin was living with his mother and stepfather. At that time, Bill owned an auto repair shop, and Diane had started a business on eBay, filling the house's bedrooms with her merchandise. The spouses felt they had fulfilled their duty in raising their children and were looking forward to enjoying life just the 2 of them. They even tried to officially evict their son from the house, but without a job, he had nowhere to go, and his mother always took him back. So all 3 of them continued to live in the same house. On August 15, 2010, it was a Sunday. In the quiet neighborhood of Seminole, Florida, the day began as usual. However, the tranquility of the Sunday didn't last long. Around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, shocked neighbors of the Kyne family watched through their windows as Bill and Kevin literally tumbled out of the house and continued to brawl on the front lawn. In an attempt to restrain his stepson, Bill tore his clothes, but Kevin managed to snatch his cell phone from his pocket and called 911. To witnesses, it seemed like the fight lasted an eternity. But in reality, the stepfather and stepson struggled for only a few minutes. Finally, Kevin managed to break free from Bill's grip and ran to the neighbors, dressed only in his underwear. Bill returned home and also dialed 911. The police arrived at the house in a few minutes. In the house, they found Diane dead. She was lying on the bed in the bedroom face up. Medics who arrived at the scene noticed that her body was already cold, indicating that she could have been killed sometime before the calls were made to the emergency services. An autopsy later revealed that she had been strangled. Kevin told the police that he had lain down to rest on the couch because he was recovering from a recent surgery when his stepfather woke him up by slapping him directly on his scar on his head. Bill stated that his mother wanted to talk to Kevin and asked him to come upstairs to her bedroom. Kevin replied that he wasn't feeling well and would come up later. However, Bill soon returned and demanded that his stepson come upstairs immediately. Kevin complied, but as soon as he tried to open the bedroom door, Bill attacked him from behind and put him in a chokehold. Kevin managed to notice that his mother was lying motionless on the bed, her face almost black and blue. He called out to her, but of course she didn't respond. Breaking free from Bill's grip, the young man rushed downstairs and Bill followed him. The struggle continued in the kitchen, and then the 2 men tumbled out onto the street, where astonished neighbors watched the unfolding fight. There, Bill tore Kevin's shirt and shorts off. But before that, Kevin managed to grab his phone from his shorts and called 911. Then he ran to the neighbor's house, telling them that his stepfather had killed his mother and waited with them for the police to arrive. When the police questioned Bill, he told a completely different story. The morning of that day started as usual for the family. Bill mowed the lawn and cleaned the pool. Later, he and Kevin were planning to watch NASCAR. But Kevin went upstairs to talk to Diane. Obviously, they started arguing. Bill heard Diane scream at Kevin and thought she had just yelled at her son sharply. But then, it became very quiet. 5 to 10 minutes later, he went upstairs to see what was happening. When he entered the room, Bill saw Kevin looming over his mother, strangling her. Acting quickly, he grabbed the boy by the hands and pushed him out of the room. The fight continued in the kitchen and then spilled onto the street. Bill tried to restrain his son, but he complained that Kevin was stronger and threw him around like a rag doll. When Kevin finally ran down the street, Bill did not pursue him. Instead, he returned to the house and called 911 from the kitchen. He claimed that he did not go back upstairs to check on his wife, whether she was alive or perhaps still breathing, even though he told the operator that he was with Diane and that she definitely wasn't breathing. Naturally, the police took both men in for questioning. Meanwhile, officers interviewed neighbors about what they had witnessed. When one neighbor, about to leave after providing her statement, sighed and said, "It's terrible that this is the second wife who has died in this house." It was a surprising turn that the police had not anticipated. In cases like these, suspicion often falls on the spouse. What was unusual in this case is that Bill had already had one wife who died just 8 months before he met Diane. By the time of her death in 2000, 44-year-old Krista and 42-year-old Bill had been married for 22 years and had raised 5 children in the same house that Kevin and Diane would later move into. On Easter Sunday morning in 2000, Bill found his wife in the pool. While he was pulling her out of the water, their daughter called for an ambulance, but it was already too late. Bruises were found on the woman's head, and investigators concluded that she had left the house at night, tripped, hit her head, and fell into the pool. Bill was never considered a suspect. Her death was deemed accidental. After his wife's death, he received a $250,000 insurance payout. This was only one of the insurance payouts Bill received over the years. It seemed that Bill Kyne had incredibly bad luck in both his personal life and business ventures. His auto shop and the property he had invested in both burned down, and he received insurance payouts for them as well. At least one of these incidents was suspected of arson, though it couldn't be proven. Each of these incidents individually did not seem suspicious. However, the overall picture was quite unusual. What added to the suspicion was that Diane was insured for $750,000. Bill was asked to take a polygraph test, and he failed it, lying about 2 key aspects of Diane's murder and what he found his stepson doing over her. As for the DNA evidence, no DNA from her son, who Bill claimed was strangling his mother, was found on Diane's neck. However, there was DNA from her husband on her neck. The police had to disregard this evidence because the spouses shared a bed, loved each other, and it was not unusual for the husband's DNA to be found on his wife. Bill was questioned 3 times. Initially, he denied returning to the bedroom after the fight with his stepson, but during the 911 call, he clearly stated that he was with his wife, trying to help her. When this discrepancy was pointed out during the 3rd interrogation, he admitted to entering the room but lied, claiming he never returned to the bedroom. His contradictory statements raised suspicions. What added to the suspicions was Bill's history of police interactions. Between 1975 and 2014, he had been arrested 4 times for driving under the influence. So Bill did not appear to be an innocent bystander, and he was aware of this himself. However, once investigators began to believe that he was the prime suspect in his wife's murder, they discovered something they didn't know before. Prior to Diane's murder, the police had been called to the family's home several times, and Kevin Kyne was involved in these incidents. Kevin always had a volatile temper, and despite some initial sympathy, his relationship with his stepfather had soured. He often behaved like an immature child, taunting his stepfather, saying, "Try hitting me and I'll call the police and they'll arrest you." He frequently called the police himself, and each time the officers found that despite Kevin's calls, he was the problem. However, in recent times his behavior worsened, and he began displaying aggression even towards his mother, insulting and threatening her. The situation was exacerbated by the fact that the 23-year-old couldn't hold down a job, constantly complaining of headaches and preferring to spend entire days on the computer. Diane believed that her son was simply lying about his health to avoid work, but to her horror, she found out that he had a brain tumor when she took him to the hospital. He had undergone surgery a month before the murder. However, he had barely begun to recover when his mother and stepfather once again demanded that he find a job and his own place to live. And then, 5 weeks before the deadline for him to move out, she was killed. The evidence gathered at the murder scene, including the 5 small blood drops found on Diane's leg and the blanket, as well as the presence of Kevin's shoes and glasses near the bed, played a crucial role in the investigation. Despite Kevin's claims that he never entered the bedroom, forensic analysis revealed that the shoes and glasses belonged to him. Realizing that he was the prime suspect, Kevin voluntarily took a polygraph test and passed it without any issues. However, the presence of his belongings in the bedroom raised doubts. Furthermore, Kevin's DNA was not found on his mother's neck, and Bill did not mention that Kevin was wearing gloves during the altercation. Nevertheless, Kevin appeared to be the more likely suspect to investigators, given his aggressive behavior during the fight compared to Bill's calm and composed demeanor. The prosecutor, unsure if the evidence against Kevin was sufficient, decided to present the case to a grand jury. If they believed the evidence was insufficient, Kevin would be released. Kevin's lawyers believed that he could give testimony in his favor. However, unbeknownst to Kevin, the prosecutor had just received the laboratory report about the blood drops found on the blanket and Diane's leg. When Kevin took the witness stand, the prosecutor asked him directly how he could explain the presence of his blood in the room if he claimed not to have entered it. Kevin was caught off guard and couldn't provide a satisfactory explanation. This confusion proved costly, as he was subsequently charged with first-degree murder, and the case was sent to trial. Given the stark differences in the men's stories and motives, the prosecution relied heavily on the physical evidence. They couldn't explain how Kevin's blood ended up in the room if he didn't enter it. While Kevin had obvious scratches from the altercation with Bill, his failure to mention wearing gloves and the presence of his personal items in the room painted a suspicious picture. Kevin's defense argued that Bill was the killer, with a clear motive being the $750,000 insurance payout. But they did not inform the jury about Bill's previous wife's death and other insurance payouts. The jury also did not hear about Kevin's 911 call, only Bill's call. Ultimately, the jury did not find anything suspicious in Bill's behavior and did not see reason to doubt Kevin's guilt. They convicted Kevin of second-degree murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Kevin's lawyers immediately filed an appeal, confident in their client's innocence and believing that the appeal would be granted. The issue at hand was that the prosecutor was allowed to tell the jurors about Kevin and Bill's constant conflicts, how Kevin often called the police to annoy his stepfather. The prosecution argued that this demonstrated Kevin as a troublemaker. They also claimed that Kevin's call after his mother's murder was no different from his previous calls, where he allegedly tried to shift blame onto his stepfather. The prosecutor argued that this information was not significant for the case. Kevin's defense team seized upon this argument, contending that the negative perception of Kevin was formed in the jurors' minds due to this information. They argued that Kevin's disputes with his stepfather had no relevance to any anger he might have had towards his mother or the circumstances of her murder. Furthermore, if this information was not essential to the case, it should be excluded, and a new trial should be conducted. This effectively tied the hands of the appellate court, allowing for another trial. The second trial took place in early 2015. It was held in the same courtroom with the same judge, prosecutor, and even the same prosecution strategy. However, Kevin's lawyers were much more assertive this time, directly accusing Bill of being the killer. Additionally, Kevin took the witness stand. He openly admitted that at the age of 23, he was immature, unpleasant, and rude, even towards his mother. He also stated that his mother was everything to him, giving him no reason to harm her. While allowing some room for maneuver, he added that when he opened the bedroom door, he could have taken 2 steps inside, but he continued to insist that he did not approach the bed. Interestingly, despite the prosecutor's emphasis on the presence of Kevin's blood in the bedroom, the prosecution still could not explain how it got there. There was no blood under Diane's nails, no sharp objects in the room, and no signs that Kevin was bleeding before the altercation with his stepfather. If Bill scratched him, trying to pull him away from Diane, there should have been blood on the staircase, in the kitchen, and outside, where they continued to fight. However, it was evident that Bill scratched Kevin only outside, And since Kevin did not return to the house, the prosecution's expert had to speculate on what might have happened. Her theory suggested that Kevin either spat or coughed blood onto the blanket and his mother's leg. Of course, this theory seemed far-fetched. Kevin was not so unwell that he would cough up blood while killing his mother. So, where did these tiny droplets come from? The defense had a version that appeared more logical and consistent with the evidence. Forensic experts analyzed the hands of Diane, Bill, and Kevin, and the only foreign DNA found was Kevin's under Bill's fingernails. After the altercation, Kevin ran to the neighbors and waited there for the police, while Bill entered the house with Kevin's blood on his fingers. One does not need to be a genius to figure out what happened next. However, the defense could not secure the support of an independent expert because they lacked the funds, as Kevin was represented by court-appointed attorneys. Therefore, the jurors only heard the prosecution's expert. Nevertheless, this time the jurors found reason to doubt, which their predecessors did not, and Kevin was released from prison after several years. When the verdict was delivered, Bill was present in the courtroom with his new wife. He had married for the third time to a woman named Tanya. Unfortunately, this marriage didn't last long, and Tanya passed away from cancer in 2017. The following year, Bill published an autobiography where he described all of his losses. The book was titled Love That Lasts a Lifetime. A year later, he was accused of fleeing the scene of an incident when he rode his motorcycle into a group of cyclists, resulting in one of them ending up in the intensive care unit. However, Bill was not the only one who found himself in legal trouble again. Kevin, who had returned to his original surname Karakesh and promised to become the person his mother wanted him to be, was arrested in 2016 after a brawl at a pool hall. He struck his opponent with a billiard triangle. Afterward, he settled in Sarasota, Florida, and seemed to lead a rather quiet life. The murder of Diane Kyne remains unsolved. Her husband and son continue to accuse each other of being the murderer, and there is no doubt that one of them is right. It is not possible to try the son again. The prosecution naturally insists that they did not make a mistake with the murderer and have no intention of charging Bill.